My daughter Anna got married recently, and I was there to support her as her dad. I raised her alone after her mother passed away, but at her wedding I felt out of place. She had labeled me as just a useless middle school graduate. The event was filled with high-status people, making it clear that I didn't belong. The atmosphere at the celebration was tense, and it all fell apart when Anna suddenly ripped off her wedding dress and shouted, "Dad, let's go home." I agreed, and just as we turned to leave, a loud scream came from an unexpected direction. The guests froze in shock at what they saw. My name is Paul, and I'm 63 years old. I have one daughter, Anna, and she's always been special. When she was just 6, she came to me with a drawing. "Daddy, look at this," she said excitedly. It wasn't an ordinary drawing. It was a diagram of a ballpoint pen she had taken apart. Anna often took things apart to see how they worked, but drawing a detailed diagram of it was something I never expected. At that moment, I knew she was destined to do great things. Anna has always been physically weak, so she couldn't play outside much like other kids. Instead, she spent her time doing experiments and exploring things that fascinated her. She became curious about astronomy and weather. One day she asked me, "Daddy, why do clouds float in the sky?" It was a simple question, but I had never really thought about it before. I explained, clouds aren't solid. They're made of tiny droplets of water. Because of gravity, temperature, and how light the droplets are, they float instead of falling. I worried the explanation might be too complicated for her, but she took my answer and ran with it. She asked her teacher about clouds and read everything she could find in the library. By the time she was 12, she understood the science behind clouds better than most adults. Even her teachers were amazed by her curiosity and intelligence. Anna didn't get her talent from me. I don't have any special skills, but her mother was both beautiful and brilliant, a perfect mix of looks and intelligence. Anna must have inherited her gifts from her. My wife, however, passed away the day Anna was born. Everything seemed fine during the pregnancy and delivery, but moments after Anna was born, my wife's condition took a turn for the worse. Her body tensed up, and in a few seconds, her heart stopped. With today's medical technology, there's a much higher chance of survival in cases like hers, but back then, things weren't as advanced. There was a 95% chance of death for mothers who developed her condition, which was extremely rare. Only a few dozen women in the American experience it each year. My wife gave her life to bring Anna into this world. She didn't even get the chance to see the daughter she had sacrificed everything for. I didn't know what to do. Of course, I loved my daughter Anna, but I never imagined she came into this world by taking her mother's life. Sometimes, when I looked at her peaceful sleeping face, so much like her mother's, it felt almost cruel. What was I supposed to do? The happiness I had dreamed of, the months I spent with my wife, excited for Anna's arrival, shattered like glass in an instant. Overcome with emotions, I cried until I had no tears left. Then, through my despair, I heard a tiny voice that reminded me of what I still had to do. "Anna, all right, you're hungry, aren't you? It's time for your milk," I said. "Don't worry, I'll protect you no matter what." Holding her tiny, warm body in my arms, I made a promise to myself. Even if I had to do it alone, I would raise Anna to be a strong, happy adult. I would give her anything she needed and be there for her, always. As if she understood my thoughts, she wrapped her tiny hand around my finger. Oh, what were we talking about again? Her voice snapped me back to the present. Standing in front of me, with a smile as bright as the sun, was Anna. She had grown into a beautiful, confident young woman. She looks just like her mother. Anna, now 25, has healthy, sun-kissed skin, long chestnut hair with soft waves, and striking light blue eyes. "Which of these dresses do you think looks better?" she asked, holding up 2 options. "How about the powder blue one on the right? It matches your eyes and looks beautiful." Her eyes sparkled as she smiled softly at my answer. Over the years, noticing how much Anna resembled her mother brought me quiet comfort. Her hair, her eyes, even her expressions reminded me of the love of my life. And now, my little girl was about to get married. Her fiancé, Adam, works at the same company as her. When they came to tell me about their engagement, I liked him right away. "I'm still learning," Adam had said, "and honestly, Anna doesn't need anyone to take care of her. She's amazing on her own. But I want to be the person who supports her when she's tired, someone she can lean on when she needs a break." Hearing those words surprised me, but they also touched my heart. Most of all, Anna had chosen him, and that was enough for me. I gave them my blessing even though it was her choice, not mine. Since then, I've noticed how much happier she looks around Adam. My serious, hard-working daughter has a lightness in her eyes when she's with him, a bit like how I felt when I was with her mother. Before I knew it, the wedding preparations were in full swing, and my little girl was about to start a new chapter in her life. I muttered to myself, "Is it really okay that I haven't met his parents yet?" Anna and Adam had already introduced both sets of parents to each other, but I hadn't had the chance to meet Adam's parents. I thought we should at least meet before the wedding, but neither Anna nor Adam seemed interested in setting it up. "I don't think it's necessary for you to meet them before the wedding," Anna said. "I agree. There's no need to trouble you with it, sir," Adam added. Their words felt off, like they were trying to hide something. Still, I figured they must have their reasons, so I decided not to push it. I chose to respect their wishes and stayed out of it. Today, however, was the wedding rehearsal, and I was told Adam and his parents would be arriving soon. Oddly enough, I felt nervous. I kept pacing, sipping coffee, and heading to the bathroom every 45 minutes. When I finally heard the door open, I froze as Adam walked in, followed by 3 people I assumed were his parents. Adam's mother, Lauren, looked me up and down, her gaze moving from my head to my toes like she was sizing me up. I'd heard she was in her 60s, but she looked much younger than that. Trying to ignore the awkward tension, I introduced myself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Paul, Anna's father." I extended my hand for a handshake, but neither of them took it. Feeling uneasy, I looked at them closely. Both were staring at me with cold, judging eyes. "Oh, I thought Anna's father would be quite handsome since she's such a beauty," Lauren said with a laugh that was more mocking than kind. Standing beside her, Adam's father had a stern, almost hostile expression. In a deep voice, he muttered, "About 5 feet 8 inches, average face, not overweight but not slim either. Just ordinary." The sarcastic tone in his voice was sharp, and something about it felt familiar. My mind raced, trying to figure it out. Then it hit me. I knew this man. The arrogant look, the mocking tone, it all came flooding back. "You've got to be kidding me. James?" I blurted out. "That's right," he said, a smirk on his face. "Long time no see." I couldn't believe it. The man standing in front of me, my daughter's future father-in-law, was none other than my old nemesis from middle school. James and I had been classmates for only 4 years, but those years were enough to leave a mark. Back then, I was always ranked first in our grade, and James was consistently second, right behind me. He had always seen me as a rival, even though I never thought of him that way. "You're so obnoxious, Paul," he'd say. "You're always at the top of the class. Couldn't you let me have it just once? That's why I can't stand perfectionists like you." He'd say things like that while I quietly read my books. But it wasn't about being a perfectionist, I just couldn't be satisfied unless I gave my best effort. I never imagined I'd run into him again, especially not here, and certainly not as the father of my daughter's fiancé. I always gave everything my best effort, so my test scores were nearly perfect, either 400 or sometimes 395 because of small mistakes. James was smart too, but no matter how hard he tried, he could never beat me. After every test, he'd throw snide remarks my way, clearly frustrated. Then, one early summer before graduation, my life fell apart. My parents passed away. I won't go into the details, but the loss completely shattered me. I lost all motivation. I didn't even show up for the final exams and stayed home, drowning in grief. I barely noticed the summer heat fading into autumn. Even though my earlier high grades allowed me to move up a grade, I became a recluse, staying with relatives and shutting myself off from the world. During that dark time, James saw an opportunity to tear me down further. "See? You got what was coming to you," he sneered. "This is what happens when you hog the spotlight and don't let others have a turn. Now you've fallen and I'm rising." Unlike you, I'm transferring to a prestigious private high school, and I'm going to become a government official. You'll be stuck watching my success from the sidelines for the rest of your life." Those were his parting words before he disappeared from my life. I later heard he moved to a dorm to attend that private school. I didn't go to any reunions or keep in touch with my old classmates. I completely cut ties with my past. Just when I thought I would never recover from losing my parents, a ray of hope appeared in my life: my wife. She was 4 years older than me, and meeting her changed everything. She helped me rethink my life and gave me the strength to move forward. Even though I later had to face losing her too, she left me with the most precious gift, our daughter, Anna. Since then, I've dedicated my entire life to raising Anna and ensuring her future was bright. I worked tirelessly, doing everything I could to give her the life she deserved. Now, just as I thought she'd found the perfect person to marry, I find out her future father-in-law is none other than my old rival, James. It felt like fate was punishing me for my past, for running away when life got hard. I took a deep breath and turned to face James. "James, I never imagined I'd run into you again, especially at this stage of life." James smirked, that same arrogant grin I remembered from years ago. "Yeah, funny how life works. Who would have thought the daughter of an useless middle school graduate like you would end up marrying my son? Life sure is unpredictable." His words were a clear insult. I didn't care if he looked down on me, I was used to that, but dragging my daughter into it was something I couldn't tolerate. I had spent my entire life protecting and raising Anna, and hearing him belittle her hit a nerve I couldn't ignore. Back in the day, I never fought back, no matter what James said. I hated confrontation and always avoided it. But this time was different. I looked him in the eye and spoke firmly, "Let me make one thing clear. This marriage is about Anna and Adam, not about us. Whatever you think of me doesn't matter. My only focus is their happiness. We're only becoming in-laws, nothing more, nothing less." "Don't mix it up," I said firmly. My words seemed to hit a nerve. James, with his usual smugness, sat down on the sofa, crossed his legs, and said, "I have no intention of becoming in-laws with someone like you. I'll admit Anna is brilliant enough to marry into our family, but once they're married, she'll cut ties with you and become a stranger. We plan to adopt Anna as our own daughter the moment she marries into this family." Before I could even respond, Adam stepped in. "Dad, hold on. This is the first I'm hearing about this." "Mom, did you know about this?" Lauren, in a mocking, playful tone, replied, "Oh, who knows? I'm just a woman who married into this family. Whatever your father says goes, right? If he says it'll happen, then it will." Then she turned to Adam and added, "Has talking to a useless middle school graduate lowered your IQ or something?" Her words weren't just insulting, they were cruel. It wasn't what she said about me that upset me, it was the way she spoke to her own son. I could see Adam's face tighten, his fists trembling slightly. Now I understood why Adam and Anna had been so hesitant to arrange this meeting. It must have been a shock for Adam to realize his father and I had a history. As I thought about James's petty remarks and Lauren's heartless attitude, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of parents they were. Before I could figure out how to respond, Anna stepped in to diffuse the tension. "Let's not have this kind of atmosphere during the dress fittings and rehearsal, okay? We also have a tasting for the meals today, so please enjoy yourselves." She spoke calmly but firmly, changing the subject without addressing the conflict. Lauren stood up, nodding as if nothing had happened. "That's right. We didn't come here to waste time. We're here to make sure the food we serve to our guests is up to standard." As she turned to leave, I noticed something odd. She dragged her right foot slightly as she walked. "Your right foot?" I started to ask, but Lauren cut me off sharply. "Your concern is unnecessary. What could a middle school graduate like you possibly know?" she snapped before walking out with James. The door closed, and silence filled the room. It was just me, Anna, and Adam now. Adam took a deep breath and then bowed his head deeply. "I'm so sorry for my parents' rude behavior," he said. "They've always had this superiority complex, and even I can't control them. If only my brother were here." It was then that I learned about Adam's older brother. He had passed away while abroad. "My brother was an incredible pharmacist," Adam explained quietly. He was gifted from a young age, and my parents always held him in the highest regard. After he passed, it's like they've been trying to control me even more, as if I have to fill his shoes. Hearing this, I felt a mixture of sadness and respect for Adam. Despite the pressure from his parents, he was standing strong for Anna and trying to make their future work. It gave me hope that maybe, together, they could rise above all this. Adam's older brother had always been passionate about pharmacology, and everyone believed he was destined to become a top professional in the field. But when he turned 26, he made a sudden announcement. He was going overseas. My parents tried to stop him, Adam explained. If it had been for a vacation or to train at a world-famous hospital, things might have been different. But the path my brother chose was much harder. He paused, then continued, "Have you heard of those medical organizations that work in dangerous areas?" Hearing that, my heart sank. I swallowed hard and answered, "Yes, I've heard of them." "So, your brother?" Adam nodded silently. That's why my parents didn't want him to go. He didn't need to say anything more. I could already imagine the weight of what he must have gone through, as well as what might have happened to his brother. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind where no one knows what to say next. Anna, however, broke through the gloom. "Hey, why are we getting so down? I've heard Adam talk about his brother before, and I know the story. But I'm sure he wouldn't want us to be sitting here all sad, right?" Her words seemed to lift Adam's spirits, even if only a little. "Yeah, you're right," he said. "Let's just focus on the wedding for now." Adam then turned to me and said, "Paul, I really am sorry for how my parents acted earlier." I placed a hand on his shoulder and said gently, "The only thing that matters is that you and Anna are happy. The rest doesn't mean anything." After that, I decided not to bring up what had happened again. Neither James nor Lauren said anything either. Maybe it was because the venue staff were nearby, or perhaps they were pretending to behave. Either way, they spent the rest of the time smiling and avoiding any more trouble. I didn't realize it then, but this was just the calm before the storm. As the day went on, I sampled the meal options and eventually headed home. Time flew by, and before I knew it, the wedding day had arrived. I couldn't believe the moment was finally here. My little Anna, who used to walk behind me saying, "Daddy," had grown up so much. Seeing her in her pure white wedding dress was a sight I would never forget. I didn't think it was appropriate to carry around a large portrait of my late wife, so instead, I brought a small photograph from one of our trips together. It was my way of sharing this special day with her, even if only in spirit. The ceremony was breathtaking, emotional, and almost magical. It's a memory I'll cherish forever. Afterward, we moved to the reception hall. That's when something unexpected happened. "What is this seating chart?" I muttered, staring at the paper in disbelief. Sure enough, I was labeled as useless middle school graduate dad. I could hear murmurs spreading across the room as guests noticed the insult on the seating chart. The staff hurriedly rushed to collect the charts, their faces pale as they bowed repeatedly, apologizing over and over. Anna and Adam were backstage, changing into their second outfits, so they hadn't seen any of this yet. From the panic on the staff's faces and the nature of the insult, I had no doubt about who was behind it. "Well, how about that? My little surprise for you," said a cold, mocking voice behind me. I turned to see James standing there with a smug grin on his face. Beside him, Lauren hid her expression behind a folding fan, but her posture and the slight shake of her shoulders told me she was laughing at me. My body trembled slightly, but not with anger for myself. It was for Anna. This wasn't about me. I had lived long enough to shrug off insults like these. But for the father of the bride to be humiliated in front of so many guests would spark rumors that could hurt Anna deeply. I had tried to avoid making a scene all day, but this childish stunt had pushed me to my limit. Calmly, I said, "At 63 years old, you still find time to pull something this immature? How pathetic." James's grin widened. "I'm a man who graduated from a prestigious university, climbed the ranks to become a government official, and raised a son who works for a top company. And you? You gave up on school, locked yourself away, didn't even take the high school entrance exams, and stayed nothing more than a middle school graduate. This is a celebration for the elite. You should leave immediately." His voice was loud and filled with venom, echoing across the room. Curious guests began to gather, drawn by the commotion. I was about to respond, concerned about how this public embarrassment might affect Anna, but before I could, a calm, firm voice rang out. "Dad, let's go home." The voice was deeper than usual, but I knew it immediately. It was Anna. I turned to see her standing there, no longer in her wedding gown but back in her casual clothes. Her face was emotionless, as if all feeling had been drained. The staff, who had just finished collecting the seating charts, stood frozen, trembling as they watched her. Anna had clearly heard everything. Adam joined her a moment later, also out of his tuxedo and back in regular clothes. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of anger that sent chills through me. "Paul, let's go." Meanwhile, James and Lauren's faces twisted in fury. "What's the meaning of this?" James shouted. "Adam, Anna, the reception is about to start. Why are you doing this?" Adam stepped forward, his 6 feet 4 inches frame towering over his much shorter mother. Lauren flinched and let out a small yelp as she took a step back. "Mom," Adam said, his voice cold and sharp, "aren't you ashamed of what you've done? I understand that you've put all your expectations on me since my brother passed away, but I am not your puppet. I want to live my own life," Adam said firmly. "I'll repay the kindness you've shown me, but if you keep acting this way, I'm ready to cut ties with both of you." A heavy silence fell over the room. Guests who had been watching quietly started whispering to each other, too afraid to get involved. James, unable to hold back his anger, shouted, "How dare you? Defying your parents is unforgivable. But you and Anna can leave. This wedding is completely off." Nothing had changed. James was still the same person who had once screamed at me in school, demanding I let him have the top spot. I was too tired even to sigh. Ignoring James, I turned to Anna and said, "You're right. Let's go home." With James canceling the wedding, there was no way it could continue. Though it inconvenienced the guests, leaving seemed like the best choice. Just as we turned to go, a sudden scream came from behind. I spun around to see Lauren collapsing, her face pale as she crumpled to the floor. Guests began to panic, shouting in confusion. I rushed over immediately. "Hey, what are you doing to my wife?" James tried to push me back, but I raised my voice for the first time. "Do you want her to die right here?" James froze, shocked by my words. While he stood there in silence, I quickly called for an ambulance. Adam, still stunned by the sight of his mother on the ground, was frozen, unable to react. People crowded around, asking what was happening, their voices full of panic. Anna pushed her way through and hurried to my side. "Dad," she said urgently. She mentioned feeling dizzy earlier. Her steps seemed unsteady, and when she helped me with the veil, her hands were trembling. Hearing this, I knew right away. It had to be a stroke. I carefully tilted Lauren onto her side, raised her head slightly, and spoke to her calmly. She responded faintly, which was a good sign. But until the ambulance arrived, I had to monitor her closely. If her condition worsened, I'd have to perform CPR. Rolling up my sleeves, I focused on keeping her stable. Adam, snapping out of his daze, rushed over. "What's going to happen to my mom?" "She's still conscious, which is a good sign," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But with a stroke, immediate treatment is critical. Without it, there could be serious aftereffects, or worse. We'll do everything we can until the ambulance gets here." Adam nodded quickly, trying to stay calm, but James was still panicking. "Stay away from her. Don't touch her," James shouted, ignoring his relatives who tried to calm him down and explain the situation. He kept calling out Lauren's name, his voice filled with fear. It was clear he couldn't process what was happening. As I watched him, I couldn't help but think back to my own past. I reached into my pocket and touched the photo of my late wife. Looking at her smiling face, I prayed silently, "Please, let me save her this time. Give me the strength to do it." Just then, we heard the staff call out from the entrance. "The ambulance is here." The paramedics rushed in, and we quickly moved to get Lauren the help she needed. "Let's go," I said firmly, as the team worked to stabilize her and prepare her for transport. I slipped the photo of my wife back into my pocket and took a deep breath to steady myself. Hours later, Adam called to let me know that Lauren had survived the surgery. Relief washed over me. Even though the wedding had to be canceled, knowing Lauren was okay made it all worthwhile. After Lauren was taken to the hospital, Anna and I stayed behind to handle the return of wedding gifts and explain the situation to the guests. By the time we finished, exhaustion hit me, and I felt my knees weaken. Anna quickly supported me. "You did great, Dad," she said with a warm smile. "I'm so glad she made it through." "Yeah," I said, letting out a sigh. "But it's not over yet. There's still a lot to do." Anna nodded slowly, and we started walking down the moonlit street toward the hospital where Lauren had been admitted. Visiting hours ended at 9 p.m., so we only had about 45 minutes to see her. We hurried and arrived just as Lauren was waking up. She lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling while James sat at her bedside, clutching her hand and sobbing uncontrollably. Adam saw us at the door and gestured for us to come in. "Thanks for coming, Dad." "Come on," Adam said softly. His words seemed to nudge James, who shifted uncomfortably, opening and closing his mouth as though trying to speak but not finding the right words. I sighed and decided to address it head-on. "Look," I said plainly, "I didn't save Lauren because you told me to. I don't need any half-hearted thanks." James looked down, clearly embarrassed. After a moment of silence, Lauren whispered something in a hoarse voice. "Olivia?" Adam leaned in gently. "Mom, don't push yourself. Just rest for now. We'll talk again later." His calm, reassuring tone seemed to help, and Lauren soon drifted back to sleep. "Dad, just wait here for a bit," Adam said as he and Anna left to grab some takeout for dinner. That left me alone with James. The silence between us was heavy and awkward, but to my surprise, James spoke first. "When Lauren collapsed, I was completely useless," he admitted quietly. "You and Anna stayed so calm. Have you worked in medicine before?" I realized James still believed I had only a middle school education. He was probably shocked by how I had handled the situation. It was time to explain. "No," I began, "I'm not just a middle school graduate. I was delayed for a few years, but I passed my GED, went on to college, and eventually became a doctor." James blinked, stunned. "A doctor?" he asked, almost disbelieving. I nodded, recalling how James once mentioned wanting to be a doctor too. I had assumed he'd pursue that path given his ambition, but clearly, that hadn't happened. "Being a high-ranking bureaucrat is impressive," I said, "but it doesn't seem like you chose it because you loved it." James sighed heavily, his usual arrogance replaced by something closer to regret. "In my family, becoming a bureaucrat was a tradition passed down for generations. The pressure was enormous, and my father constantly criticized me for never being able to take the top spot in school," he admitted. "That's why you were so obsessed with being number one?" I asked. James nodded slowly. "Yes. But I realized something back then. What's the point of being number one if it only happens because someone else holds back?" He paused and looked away, as if struggling with the memory. "When you didn't transfer to a prestigious high school, even though your grades could have gotten you in?" I understood. I stayed quiet, letting his words sink in. For the first time, James wasn't the arrogant rival I remembered, but a man weighed down by expectations he never asked for. I felt a wave of relief as James continued. "Thanks to that, I became the top student at my new school, did well in university, and eventually became a bureaucrat. But no matter how far I climbed, I always felt empty inside, because he wasn't there." "You mean Tyler?" I asked gently. James's eyes widened in shock at the mention of his late son's name. He froze, staring at me as if searching for answers. Slowly, I pulled the photo of my wife from my pocket and showed it to him. In the picture were my wife, Olivia, and myself. "How do you know Tyler?" James stammered. "Tyler and I worked closely together in a medical aid organization," I said. "My wife, Olivia, was a nurse, and Tyler had incredible knowledge of medicine. Together, we saved countless lives." My voice faltered as memories of those days filled me with both warmth and pain. I'll never forget that day. You should be proud of Tyler's final moments. As a member of the medical team, he carried out his duty with incredible bravery. Olivia and I did everything we could to help him, but in the end, Tyler insisted that the resources we had be used for the children in need, not himself. James's face crumpled, and tears welled in his eyes as I continued. Tyler was a truly kind soul. He never spoke much about his family, so I didn't know his story. I think it's time you have this. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a small piece of paper. This is a note Tyler left behind, I said, handing it to James. James took the note with trembling hands. As he read it, sobs escaped him, and he collapsed to the ground. Tyler, he wasn't really my son, James managed to say through his tears. I married Lauren when Tyler was 14. He wasn't my biological son, but I loved him like he was my own. And now he's gone. Tyler? James fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, forming a puddle on the asphalt under the clear night sky. At that moment, Anna and Adam returned, rushing over, alarmed by the sight of James sobbing uncontrollably. But James was too consumed by his grief to explain. A few days later, after Lauren regained enough strength to speak, I visited her in the hospital. Though she was still bedridden, the quick treatment meant she wouldn't suffer any lasting damage. With proper rehabilitation, she would eventually return to her normal life. When Lauren saw me enter the room, her gaze fell on the photo in my hand. That photo, it's of Olivia, isn't it? She asked softly. I nodded. You know my wife? Lauren closed her eyes for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then, to my surprise, she said, yes. When I was 20, I studied abroad in Switzerland to train as a nurse. That's when I met Olivia. She was only 14 at the time, but we bonded over our shared admiration for Catherine Deneuve. Her voice carried a mix of nostalgia and warmth as she recounted the unexpected connection. It was as if, in that moment, a piece of the past we hadn't known was revealed, tying everything together. I had Tyler when I was 22, Lauren began softly, and I had to give up my dream of becoming a nurse. But Olivia, she must have become an amazing nurse, didn't she? I nodded. She did. Olivia was called the modern-day Nightingale by those in the field. People referred to her as the saint with the lamp. By the time I met her, she was 36, and her skills as a nurse were extraordinary. We worked together, got married, and alongside Tyler, we saved countless lives. I paused, remembering the painful moment. When Tyler collapsed during a mission from a stroke, I lost control. I acted far from what's expected of a doctor. But even then, Olivia stayed calm. And Tyler, even as his strength faded, thought only of others. He insisted on prioritizing the children who needed resources, not himself. I reached into my pocket, my voice steady. Tyler made me promise that if I ever returned to the States and met his parents, I would deliver a message. He said that while his life might end there, he wanted you and James to live long lives. He especially wanted you to take care of your health, knowing the family history of strokes. Lauren listened quietly, her expression filled with both grief and understanding. James told me what happened to Tyler, she said, her voice strained but steady. After we lost him, both James and I became so focused on Adam. We wanted him to have a happy, normal life, but, in our pride and stubbornness, we ended up hurting Anna and you. She paused, tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't until I saw the look on Adam's face that I realized how wrong we were. Apologizing won't fix everything, but please, let me say it. I'm sorry. And, thank you for saving me. She extended her hand for a handshake, her sincerity clear. There was no hesitation in her gesture, and I saw no reason to refuse. I shook her hand firmly. As a doctor, I did what I was supposed to do. You don't need to thank me for that, I said gently. But please, when Anna visits, apologize to her. That's all I ask. Lauren nodded, tears streaming down her face as she looked me in the eye. For several heartfelt moments, the silence spoke more than words could. Later, both families sat together and reconciled. While I knew I might never fully forgive James and Lauren for their actions, their acknowledgement of their mistakes was enough for me. What mattered most was that Anna was happy. A few weeks later, Anna gently rubbed her slightly rounded belly and smiled. "Oh, Dad, the baby just moved," she said softly. Adam stood beside her, wrapping his arms around both Anna and their unborn child in a protective embrace. Watching that simple, everyday moment, I realized this was true happiness, the kind I had always wished for my daughter. I had always wished for Olivia to be here too. She would have cared about nothing more than Anna's happiness. One day, I received an unexpected call from James. "I'd like you to come and pay your respects at Tyler's grave," he said. Without a second thought, I agreed and made my way there. The cemetery was peaceful, with sunlight filtering gently through the trees. The well-kept plants swayed in the breeze, creating a calm, almost serene atmosphere. It was easy to momentarily forget we were in a place of loss. When we reached Tyler's grave, I noticed a small laminated note placed there. It read, "I'm doing just fine." Just that one simple sentence, but it carried so much meaning. I imagined Tyler had left it hoping to reassure his parents back home. Though his life had been tragically cut short before he could fully achieve his mission, the note perfectly captured his bright, cheerful, and carefree spirit. "Welcome home, Tyler," James said softly. As he spoke, a gentle breeze passed through, carrying his words upward. Somehow, I felt sure they had reached Tyler. Above us, the clear, cloudless sky reflected a sense of peace, a reflection of Tyler's kind and untroubled heart.